The kids of today don't belong to you. They belong to tomorrow. So the second they're born, it's our work to set up tomorrow for them. And if we're sitting here just going, today sucks and the phones are crap and the kids can't handle anything and they're fragile, that's where a lot of this feels so regressive. We're not looking for the progressive tomorrow, which is actually where the interesting stuff happens.
Welcome, everyone. This is Ekaterina Konovalova with Trust Me, Mom, and my guest today is Dr. Will Dobud. He's the author of Kids These Days. He's a social work clinician and researcher working on innovative treatment programs integrating outdoor therapies for teens. And I'm very excited to talk to Will about his research, his book, and how we can help kids and teens these days. Will, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm a little nervous considering you did a lot of homework about kids these days. So I'm going to try to remember all the things that I'm supposed to remember. But no, it's absolutely fabulous to be here and to meet you and have a good conversation already. We've already been laughing.
Perfect. And the good news, you'll talk about yourself and your research, so it should be easy.
Yes.
And of course, the first question I have for my guests, and I'm eager to hear your story, how it all started and how did your career unfold? What inspired you to get on the path of working with kids, helping children, and becoming a researcher?
So I guess my teenage years were, I had a father that left the family. I was a naughty teenager in my own right. I got in trouble at school all the time. And that landed me, I like to say I was couch surfed from therapist to therapist to therapist to therapist. So therapy was just part of my everyday life. But I guess when I turned 18, I wanted to help people. I just thought I've been pretty selfish, as a teenager. I'm going to try and help people. And I became a volunteer firefighter, did the emergency medical technician thing, loved that. And I got a job working with young people in the outdoors. And I thought, I'm an outdoorsy kid. I grew up lucky enough to go to summer camp. Like I went to sleepaway camp. I ended up going to boarding school. And so being away from home, like this is why it's no wonder I go back and forth from Australia. Like being away never really, like I'm in my mother's house at the moment. I've probably lived more of my life away from this house than in it. So being away, being out in the woods with young people, I had this thought that when I watched, when the therapists at these organizations, of which I've been very critical of lately, but they would come out and they'd tell us, this kid is anxious and they've got these problems. And I'd go, but when we're camping, like everything's good. Like I don't see that version of that child. So I think my first few years in college, I had to learn how to learn. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't good at memorizing everything psychology was all multiple choice exams. It ended up being kind of a lucky event that at a college fair, I bumped into Katie Leiser is her name. I don't remember much else from which teacher was what, but she was promoting University of Maryland, Baltimore County's social work program. So I transferred into that program and simultaneously helped start an intensive outpatient program in Maryland for teens. So I was basically absorbing everything I was learning at university and basically sleeping on the couch with a clinical social, like sleeping on a couch in the house of a clinical social worker, not with the clinical social worker, and absorbing that of starting a program, figuring out the ins and outs of running a nonprofit, running a business. And so I was just from 18, 19, 20 years old, I was hooked with psychotherapy. I just thought, this is what I'll do. I knew I guess I had an anxiety about this aspect of it. I knew I was good at forming relationships with young people and having fun. And I'm really good at playing around and messing around and not taking things too seriously. But then at college, I didn't feel like the other students, like I could rattle off neuroscience or talk about the most complicated new diagnosis or these sort of things. And it just made me really inquisitive about what works. How do I know what works? Part of that journey, I went to This is actually a really amazing day of my life. I was probably 21 at this stage, so wrapping up my bachelor degree, and I went to a full day training. My boss said, let's go to this National Association of Social Workers full day training. It was in Baltimore. We go to that training. It was with Matthew Selectman, who is based in Chicago. He's a solution focused kind of social worker. And the whole day blew my mind. I just thought, oh my gosh, why has no one taught me about this? This is so different, not pathologizing young people, being creative with families, being innovative about what works, doing more of what works, not focusing on what's wrong all the time. And that day I got in my car, which was full of outdoor gear, and I was about to drive home back to DC, and I saw him at the bus stop. And I went and pulled up and said, do you need a ride anywhere? And he said he needed to go to the airport. So I drove this guy that is like a hero of my life that not many people have ever heard of, that I was just like, this is unbelievable. This guy's written books. This is amazing. And that put me down a path of meeting more experts and sort of realizing, and I think you'll hear this about sort of my psychology. And I think this comes from I have a simultaneous pathway as a musician. And so as a didn't make it musician. And part of that is like when you meet people who are more famous than you, it's like, I don't know. I just have no anxiety about going up to them. So I was just like, I just started going, who's the expert that I want to learn from next? And I'm going to stalk them until they teach me everything they know. But so the weird transition is meeting my partner, Renee, to going to Australia, working at organizations there where I realized I wasn't really all that thrilled about a lot of the training I received as not only at the university, but also in jobs that I had, the way I was taught to do things, I realized quite quickly, oh my gosh, this is totally different. I have no idea what I'm doing. Did Master of Social Work, did a big research project about an organization I started in Australia. And that again got me hooked on why is it that what I see in everyday practice is not communicated in the peer reviewed academic world. And then the the books that become the most popular tend to oversimplify a lot of this, but in a way that I think can be actually not that helpful. And so it just got me from, like I said, from like 19 years old, I said, I'll just do social work forever. And I haven't looked back. I work at a large university in Australia. We're the largest school of social work. I get left alone. I get to do whatever I want. I'm one of the only faculty that meets every student that comes through our program because I love teaching the intensive schools where we have 200 students and we're all working on skills and practicing things and learning together. The energy is amazing. And I get to write whatever I want and get paid for it. And I get to meet people like you. It's been an amazing journey. And so, yeah, there's all different twists and turns we could take about how we got here, but it is a story, I think, about meeting people, meeting someone and going, yeah, I'll come to stay a summer with you in Australia, this wonderful person that became my wife, and then meeting a supervisor at a university and going, yes, I want to study under you, John. And, John and I are still good friends to this day. We work together all the time. So it's about people, but it's really kind of about, I mean, as you've read the book, I feel like a person that sometimes when I see something and go, this doesn't add up, this doesn't make sense, this feels like bullshit, I will say something about it. Maybe that's annoying to some people, but I also feel that's part of my job as a social worker. That's part of our ethos. Is one of my colleagues said, we live the rest of our life between a rock and a hard place because we love this work, but the systems we have to do it in are totally uncooperative. They're annoying. They don't change. They're not progressive like they think they are. And so that sort of stuff, I feel very fortunate and lucky that I'm in a place where I can do that. So it's been an amazing adventure. And like, yeah, one of those adventures that I could not have predicted, nor would I have wanted to.
I love this inspirational story. Definitely, you are inspiring people right now with your path. But let's talk about this rigid system and
Yes.
how some of the fields are not very helpful.
Hmm.
So, in your book, you talk about the evolution of psychiatry and psychology and how some specialists are very motivated to overdiagnose or put labels on people, and how it leads to negative consequences in youth, especially where they self identify as, I am ADHD, or, well, I have ADHD, but it becomes their identity, or I'm depressed, and what it does to them. So, can you touch on that?
Yeah. So there's a book I read. I can link this to my journey too. My boss at the time, my mentor, I wouldn't even call him a boss. The person I was working with, building a program, we were around each other every day. A very important mentor in my life. He said to me one day, "Will, I hope one day you get to see a Scott Miller presentation." And this was probably 2006, 2007. And Scott Miller is a psychologist. He was around when Solution Focused was sort of getting formed. And I didn't think anything of it. And then in 2010, 2011, I'm going back and forth from Australia, studying still. I guess we're all lifelong learners. We're always studying. Um, it popped back into my head, and I said, "Oh, I wonder who this Scott guy is." And so I bought some of his books, and I was just like, why? How is it possible? One book in particular, The Heart and Soul of Change. It's this thick. It's like my Bible of psychotherapy. I'm a very slow reader. It's one of the fastest books I've ever read. I was just like, this is unbelievable. This is the research world. How is the story of psychotherapy not told in this way? Like, we have this notion that all of these things are medical, like these are these medical conditions with medical treatments. But if you ask any therapist what works, they say, oh, it's the relationship. Like, imagine if your relationship with your surgeon predicted successful surgery. That would be, it would change the whole way we conceptualize this stuff. So the other thing that's important, and I think you're hinting at the start of the book, that these professions, my profession of social work, psychology, like American psychology, these are not old professions. These are very new. Like, we're talking just over 100 years old. I think social work wasn't formed at a university till the 30s. So these are new concepts, but we sometimes take for granted and talk about them like they're this, the scientific consensus on these ideas is there's none of this is up for debate, right? And so one of the things, like, when I'm in Australia, I live in Adelaide, and Adelaide, South Australia is where narrative therapy was born. So there is like a really amazing tradition of narrative therapy. And one of the things about narrative is you want to take a historical view of certain concepts. So something like, let me think of a funny joke here, like like trauma. Like, we all talk about trauma these days, right? We have complex trauma. Well, we also have PTSD, and PTSD was also called war neurosis or combat fatigue. And so when you go back in time, there was a time that PTSD did not exist. Right? The idea was not in the air. It wasn't around. So these ideas come about, and then they're treated like this natural law of things, where the truth is there were times that none of this existed. So you can always go back to say, where did this idea come from? Why is it important that it came about? Or was this a bad idea that came about? So one of the interesting things, if you look at social work, counseling, psychology, and of course, I'm lumping them together. They have their differences. We've always been stuck at the heels of psychiatry because psychiatry has the medical lens. They have the book of disorders. They have the pills. They have the treatment. We're always need to therapists. We do this funny thing. We need people to be sick to have worth in our job, right? So if you ask any therapist, what do you do? Who do you work with? It's always about what's wrong with people, you know? So who benefits from a youth mental health crisis is kind of a scary question if we think about this narrative, right? We've already given more antidepressants and stimulants to kids than ever before, but there's still a crisis. So what does it say about that intervention? This is the history is sort of a history of defending our existence. We need the disorders to defend the interventions we do. When people ask us what we do, we have to manualize it so that it looks like a standardized treatment. This is the McDonald'sization of therapy, right? We could make this manual, follow the manual, adhere to the manual, and then everybody will get better, which no person on planet Earth has said, I had the best therapist in the world. They followed an amazing manual. It's never happened. So the field is constantly defending itself in a way that I don't personally think is all personally and professionally don't think is all that helpful. I think what the average worker does is so effective. It's amazing. So I think that we can let go of the having to defend ourselves a little bit because we're defending it by how can I say this without getting in trouble? When we form associations and we go, this is the association of this profession, what happens is then we start protecting the association and think that that means we're protecting the profession. But when we keep protecting the association, we do things like, why is it in the United States someone graduates and has to do however many thousands of hours of usually reduced pay, all of these pre-licensing hours, then they have to take this impossible pre-licensing licensing exam that you have to study for to pass, even though you already have a university degree. Who is doing all this gatekeeping? While still think it's, if you interview psychologists, for example, 50% of them said they have worked with a client who had a sexual advancement from a previous therapist. So this gatekeeping is not fixing anything. Our outcomes have not improved for over 50 years. And in fact, the average graduating clinician in the US right now is actually starting to become less effective than they were 20 years ago as we start teaching them to manuals. We're teaching less interpersonal skills, less of how to roll with what the client gives you, go back and forth with these things. So we're seeing these things that look like this is the right idea, but it's kind of going in the opposite direction. So, but I think a lot of this comes from this medical model, this idea that if I do the right assessment, I'll come across with the right diagnosis, then I can administer the right treatment. Where the fact of the matter is, if your client leaves after one session, who cares what you assessed, what treatment you were going to provide? They didn't come back. So who cares that your doctor or master or clinician or a tarot card reader? Who cares if you know what I mean? So I think our profession is we're in this funny place where we know what we do works, and then the way we talk about it might be totally wrong and backwards.
Yes, and that actually it reminded me you had a point in another interview about how it becomes so ridiculous when people put labels that caution coffee is hot.
Right.
Same as here, teaching to the manual, become a robot, and prescribe. So basically, we are taking away from different stratas, from different populations, from youth and even from professionals. Here we talk about clinicians, that adaptive layer of critical thinking, adaptivity, and custom approach, and making it more standard, but it takes away efficiency and efficacy from the therapy often. But it also, on the other hand, protects the professional organization, fewer lawsuits because we followed the manual,
Hmm.
right? It sounds that some of your therapies with outdoor approach and outdoor therapies can be quite interesting and custom. So can you actually tell us more about what you do with your treatments?
Sure. So I think there's two sides of this because at first I was, let's say, 10 or so years ago, I was very much into the outdoors is a better place to do therapy. And so I really believed this. And when I read The Heart and Soul of Change and all these books, I went, maybe that's not true. And so I started, I when I met Scott Miller and I don't think he would say this, but I've been his understudy for the past a little bit more than a decade. I've just been following him around and trying to say, I need to learn your ways of thinking about things. But Since the 30s, and again, for a historical perspective, this will drive everybody nuts. In the 1930s, so we all love Carl Rogers, like humanism. Carl Rogers' mentor was the psychologist Saul Rosenzweig. And Saul wrote this paper in the 30s. I've read it. I don't really understand what it means, but I understand what Scott tells me what it means because it's so dense and hard to read. But back in 30s, we really had two families of therapy. So we had, and I will link this to the outdoors, trust me. So you have behaviorists, so like Pavlov's dogs, and you have the Freudian people, so psychoanalysis. So you have these two competing people and they're fighting all the time. And so like behaviorists thought that psychoanalysis was voodoo and dangerous. It's dangerous to interpret people's dreams and do all these weird techniques like free association and tell everyone that they want to have sex with their parents, all this weird stuff. And then the psychoanalysts were thinking that behaviorism was like, why are you treating people like dogs? Like, why are you telling people to like ring bells and, you know, reinforcement, positive and negative reinforcement? And this is overly simplistic. So what Saul Rosenzweig wrote in the 30s was that, hey guys, there's no difference in the two of you. You're talking about talking with people and it's probably relational and you're arguing about something that there's no there. So Carl Rogers, when he talks about core conditions of change, unconditional positive regard, empathy, congruence, these sort of things, the relationship, it turned into this idea that the humanism is this other third sort of branch of these therapies. In the 70s, you have the first meta-analysis, not the first meta-analysis in psychotherapy, the first meta-analysis of all time. This is now the technique, like if we're like, hey, do vaccines work? We better do a meta-analysis. This is the study of studies. So you bring in all the research that's relevant and you look at all of the data. So it was supposed to be a technique that it stopped scientific debate. It's like, we don't need to argue about this anymore, right? This is going to show you how silly our field is. They found therapy works. It's amazingly effective. The average person who receives therapy is better off than 80% of people who do not that could benefit. So take a risk, go to therapy if you think you need it. It's fantastic, right? If it works, it's fantastic. Now, what they also found in that study is when therapy A is compared with therapy B, there's no difference in outcomes. So it works no matter what you do, right? This was damning to the behaviorists who said, our way is better. And the analysts, our way is better. Humanist people, the client-centered, Rogerian folks, our way is better. And there's a line in that study that I do have this memorized. Let me get it out of my brain. Scholars and advocates for particular therapies are in the rather embarrassing position of saying less than what is known or saying more than what is known. So this claim that I do this treatment, it's better than that treatment, quite frankly, from our first biggest study did not pan out. So that's 1977. The year's 2025. We're almost into 2026. We had like 40 to 60 types of therapies in the 70s. We have over 1,000 today. We just keep creating these things over and over. And what is scary, like, back in the day, we used to do bloodletting and now we stopped doing bloodletting. No therapy ever disappears. So
Mhm.
Freud is back all the way with the trauma folks. On Twitter, therapist Twitter is all psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis is better than cognitive behavioral. Everything is eye movements now. We keep creating these things. Since that first meta-analysis, not 1% better outcomes. So we keep looking at the wrong thing. In the research world, we call this the streetlight effect. There's a drunk outside trying to find his keys. Someone says, why are you looking under this lamppost? And he says, well, this is where the light is. Okay, where are your keys? I think I left them way over there. So we keep looking at the easy thing. What's the manual? What's the model? And so It's researching the person out of the person. Now, for the outdoors, my view at first was the outdoors is probably better. Young people are more engaged. I can see it in my own eyes, young people that sit with me in an office versus we're outside on this wild adventure. I started looking at the data and I realized that was not true. And so what I realized is I'm a better therapist outdoors. It's actually all about me and all about the client. What we do is probably the most boring part of that story. So I started measuring my own outcomes and looking at my own data. And so for the outdoors, I think it's another place we could engage people. Like a lot of us make fun of therapists' office. They worry about what color their couch is. Where does my diploma hang? How many books do I need in my bookshelf so I look really smart? Like it's a performance, you know? And so the outdoors is just another place we can do the therapy work. That said, the outdoors has also been used in a really harmful way to a lot of young people in the name of therapy. We need to send you away and you need to go to the woods and then you can find yourself and then we'll let you leave. And so that's the same thing as all therapy, right? So in many ways, the outdoors is either just as good or just as stupid as all the other therapies are. So I don't want to think that my way of working is better than. Instead, I want to know, am I working with somebody in the right, is it likely to go in the right direction? And if not, can I help them get somewhere else? So the outdoors has in for history been used as a rite of passage. It's been used for pilgrimage. We think of Spain and El Camino de Santiago. And culturally, different cultures have different views of the outdoors. You know, I've been to Norway where there's freedom to roam laws. They have frilufsliv, an open air lifestyle. There is different cultural views of this. So in many ways, I don't think it's that different. But one thing for young people is the outdoors is an opportunity to be on display as the worker. You know, in therapy training, we tell people have these boundaries, know, no touching anybody. You know, when your session's over, that's it, it's over. Those all get thrown out the window when you're going on an expedition for 2 weeks. You're going to be sleeping near each other. You'll be pooping in a hole. You're all going to get rained on. You know, someone might get hurt and they get to watch you, how you deal with that. So there's essentially a kind of a realness to it. And we're finding some data now that practitioners with no clinical training can elicit the same amount. We've actually known this since the 80s, but can elicit the same outcomes as the licensed clinical practitioner. One concern the people with no training have is, what do I do? So doing something together gives the client and the worker something to do together. So whether it's music or hiking or fishing or art or anything, having something to do can be really engaging. And then the young person can make meaning from that experience. So the outdoors is kind of a neat alternative, but it's also not better or worse than anything else. So, and to kind of poke fun at our westernized sort of pseudo medical idea of this, we see studies like being in nature is healing. Now, for me, being in nature is awesome. I've never walked outside and thought, time for me to heal, you know, time for my dose of nature, because I've also seen rattlesnakes. I've seen grizzly bears. I've been in a cage with a great white shark. I work in Australia where everything can kill you. Like nature doesn't care about healing you. You know, spaces become healing when people attach meaning to it. So like for me, if I had to sit in a Catholic church, I'd go, what the heck am I doing here? But the person next to me might be saying, I'm healing. People make meaning from things. So the outdoors is just another cool way to work with people. The part that it feels like our professional associations and the people making all the rules, the systems, they all need it to be medicalized. And so if you want to ruin something magical, medicalize it. You'll make it boring, you know?
Yes, yeah, I love it. But let me clarify. I love this answer. When you have an outdoor therapy session, it almost sounds like a camp. Do you typically have a group of teens and several practitioners with you? What does it look like?
So what we set up with our small nonprofit was we were doing 2-week expeditions for those that wanted to do it. So that could be anywhere up to 10 young people and 4, 5 of us adults. And then, so we would do a few of those a year. And then anyone who wanted to work with us individually, we could go on a hike. They could sit in my office. We could go canoeing. We could do anything that we really wanted. We were very lucky in Australia that things are a bit looser about what a social worker can do. So it wasn't that hard. We had to get the liability insurance, and that's expensive when you say you're going to be dangling people from climbing ropes and those things. But we could do whatever we want. But the expedition work, that's my happy place, is having a group and going from day 1 to day 14 and figuring out what the heck happens. So that was a lot of camping and hiking and canoeing and all different types of adventure stuff that we were doing.
While you're having adventures, you are talking through traumatic or difficult
Yeah.
experiences that the teen had.
Yeah, so we're talking with them every day, we're throwing random interventions at them and seeing what sticks. So, for instance, if someone is quite introverted and wants to journal, like we can give them a journal, they can have time to journal, they can talk with us if they want. They can do art activities while we're out there. But we're also, and this is my solution focused kind of training coming out, if negative experiences can harm, they harm us, whether we look at it through trauma. That means experiences can also heal. So I wanted this experience to be the exact opposite of anything that hurt a young person. So they have absolute choice. They can leave if they want to. I want them to feel like they have ultimate agency. They're in control of their own body. They are learning how to sleep again, all of these sort of things. I want them to feel ultimate safety, but so that they can take risks, so that they can make wild decisions and have their childhood back. And so the outdoors, in the solution focused world, I might, if I'm office therapist with my collar shirt on, I might say to the client, let's say a young person comes to me and they're sent to me for self-harming. I might ask them, was there a time you had the urge to self-harm, but you didn't? Now, the reason I'm asking that question is I'm self-harming is the problem, right? And I want to learn if there's any exceptions to the problem. That is more interesting to me than the negative behavior. So the time someone was able to say no to something. So think like when people go on the journey to quit smoking cigarettes, right? So the first time they quit and then they fail, right? And they're like, oh, this is terrible. I quit for a day. I couldn't stick with it. But what do we know about the data? That it takes like 15 to 20 times. So your first try at quitting, it actually doesn't matter that you failed because now you're on the journey. There's an exception. You were able to stop for one day. I can work with that. So that's exceptions to the problems. They're usually really great clues to work with. And usually the exception, like I didn't want to self-harm. There was a boy coming over and I didn't want to I didn't want to have the exception could be anything. I just had I had the urge to self-harm, but I decided not to because I'm a stronger person than that. Then you have a narrative. Tell me more about being a stronger person. Now I don't even have to talk about the problem, right? In the outdoors, I wanted our sessions to be exceptions to problems. So if I see a young person, let's say, making a fire in the rain, and it's really frustrating and really hard, and I know that the school that sent him to me said he can't sit still, he's not focused, and I'm watching him focused and sitting still, I can have that conversation. Hey, I noticed you looked really determined. Can you tell me about this? And then what's happening is the young person can start internalizing, can start owning their own strengths. So instead of me saying, you are this gets into labeling. I want them to internalize what makes them awesome. And so if I can facilitate an experience where they're awesome, that's amazing. You know, like I'll tell you the story in Norway. I was there as a researcher, and the one day the person running the program said, "We're all going to stay at camp today, but if anyone wants to go hiking, they can." Now I had been in Australia for a while at the time, and I said, "I'd love to go to the top of this mountain because there's snow up there. I hadn't seen snow in a while. And the women in the group, we're talking 16-year-olds, three of the young women said, we want to go up to the snow too. And then one of the female social workers came along and we started walking. We're climbing this mountain for about 2 hours. We got to some snow. We're throwing snowballs at each other. And I was just there as a researcher. Like I had no clinical responsibility at all. Right. And then this one participant who was on the larger side, she said, I think I'm done walking. And I said, that's cool. I'll take you back to camp. And then the other girls went and they kept hiking up. I sat there for a moment and I thought to myself, shit, I am alone with a teenage girl in a country where I do not speak their native language. I have no map or compass. I have no first aid kit. Like this broke every rule of outdoor guiding, right? Like if something bad happened, I had no phone service. You know, it's pretty reckless of a story. But one of the things I could see the plume of smoke from where camp was. Like we had hiked, we gained hundreds of meters of elevation, but I could see where camp was. So I wasn't that worried at the time. And I could sense that she was quite ambivalent about going back to camp. And I said, you sure you want to go back? Like you seem like you're looking up the mountain, looking down the mountain. And she said to me, well, I'm too slow and out of shape. I can't. And I said, screw that. Like I said, let's walk for 10 minutes. I'll put a timer on my phone and then we'll see after 10 minutes, we'll make a decision. She said, sure. We hiked for 2 more hours up this mountain. And when we stopped, this rainbow came out beneath us, right? It was incredible. Over the valley, it was beautiful. She takes out her phone and starts snapping pictures of her. She goes, take pictures of me. And she's Instagramming, this is my change journey. This is my church. Like using social media for all the good things it could be used for, right? And I'm sitting there going, this is breaking every single rule of how I was trained. So I started my thesis with this story. What she said at night around the fire was that was the first time an adult did not force me to do things I didn't feel safe doing. And so she attributed me as this male, as a fatherly figure, as someone who changed a schema in her life. Now, did I do anything? No. I put on punk music and put on a timer. Like I could overcomplicate this, but she did the mental work. She was saying, this adult is safe. I can't say what's safe, what's not safe. She might have been freaking out. Why am I alone with this American man, in the middle of the woods? But so that outdoor experience where I was not there as a therapist, I did not do any psychotherapy. I didn't do anything. I was crapping my pants, freaking out. She made all of this powerful meaning about being in relationship with safe men, the kind of men she wants around in her life. And that doesn't mean that's me. It was just that was a different experience to what she had before. So this really beautiful thing happened by giving the opportunity for her to experience what she needed to. And so you could not have manualized that. It would have been lost if I said, but if you keep hiking, you'll learn that I'm a better person. Like you can't do this, right? It's kind of like therapy sometimes, and I get in trouble for saying this, but like sometimes the techniques, they're like cheesy pickup lines. Like every woman at a bar knows when a man is trying to pick you up. It's uncomfortable, it's awkward. It's like, hey, give me some space here. And
Mhm.
then it's very odd. And so the more we try to trick clients into changing, the more weird and uncomfortable and coercive and gross it all becomes. Where really we get to be a witness to this change journey. That's the power of this job, is that we get to be along for this ride that is an amazing adventure. And so adventure therapy, it's like every therapy is an adventure. Who knows who's going to walk in the door? And so that's sort of where I really love it. I love the risk of being out there. Who knows what's going to happen? Putting a group together. How are they going to function? I don't know. I think it keeps my energy alive. During COVID, when Australia went into huge lockdowns, my wife, Renee, she said to me, what do you want for your birthday? I was like, 10 kids, 10 backpacks, and like the woods. Like I need to go and have this adventure. So again, I don't think it's for everybody, but if we think about therapy as an opportunity to build for someone to see their own competence, to see their own abilities instead of this labeling of figuring out what's wrong with you. I don't believe the evidence is there to indicate that this helps us head in the right direction.
And that sounds like a beautiful story, the story of empowering that youth. But then I'll play a little devil's advocate right
Hmm.
now. And how can parents or those teens know that you were a safe person? Or things can happen. Let's say if it
Oh,
wasn't you, it was another American male who did not
yes.
have the same ethics standards and she was alone in the woods and he did something inappropriate. How can people know? And I see how some of those organizations will put those checks in place to have manuals and really
Hmm.
boring spaces with open
Yeah.
door where it's not as effective, but at least it prevents them. It reminded me of Patch Adams example
Hmm.
where he had
Yeah.
a girlfriend and she got killed in a therapy when she went to that mentally ill
Hmm.
person who killed her. So this kind of experiences can happen and the cost of mistake can be so high that
Yes.
may kill the desire for any therapist moving forward. So do you have thoughts on that?
Well, we live in what's called, and we have this in the book, like the risk society, where everything is about controlling for risk. So I'm going to say this in a horrible story that 2 years ago in North Carolina, an accredited, licensed wilderness therapy program, and these programs are part of a huge network of troubled teen industry programs that we don't need to. I can come back and talk about that. We don't need to harp on this. But what happened is a 12-year-old boy was sent, so he's picked up in the middle of the night in New York City, driven by strangers down to, this is all paid for by the parents. And I'm not particularly judging the parents. I think many of us will do anything to protect our children, to this treatment facility where he was put in a bivy sack. Now, as an outdoor person, a bivy sack is like a trash bag made of Gore-Tex. It's a lightweight one-person tent that you can zip up. Every bivy sack on earth comes with a skull and crossbones on the tag. Every outdoors person worth a penny knows don't zip up the bivy sack all the way. Now, this program put this child in a bivy sack, zip tied it closed, put an alarm on the zipper so the child could not escape. My issue with risk is this was in their policies and procedures, and the young person died, right? So licensed, NASW licensed social workers, APA, licensed psychologists, Joint Commission, state licensure, accredited by an association. Who was responsible at the end of the day? Nobody. Like, no one had the teeth to go, hold on a second. You were doing what? So they lost their licensure only after the bad thing happened. So the hardest part for a parent, and this is the part that, your question is so important. Parents give, this is why we wrote kids these days. Parents give up all the power in the world when you send your kid to a therapist. You don't know what they're going to talk about when the door closes. That's a creepy part of therapy in general. Like, why do you have to shut the door? Go sit in a park and at least you're in view of other people. You can have confidential questions elsewhere. The whole setup is geared for adults and it's just put onto children. No, going back to the history of therapy, no therapy, except for maybe play therapy, was ever created for children. Cognitive behavioral therapy was not created and tested for kids. It's just put onto kids. So again, it's part of, are we actually going to control for the person who does something monstrous? And I don't know if that's possible. That's part of the scary part of the world that we live in. So I think that it's a really hard question to answer because I see so many times things that don't change in the name of protecting the industry. So, for instance, after that boy died, I took like 2 weeks. I knew exactly I didn't have to speculate anything. I heard Bivisec, dead 12-year-old. And I went, I know exactly what happened here. And then I wrote in a way to get it out of my mind. I was losing sleep over it. I wrote a piece with a journalist, Chelsea Maldonado. I wrote an open letter to our community, and I wrote it with a bunch of other people too, because hardly anybody was saying anything in our profession. I'm part of the international adventure therapy community. Like, this practice was being lumped into, like, the Associated Press, the headline was child, 12-year-old dies on nature-based therapy program. My co-author of Kids These Days, Nevin, wrote the book Nature-Based Therapy. He would be appalled to be put in the same bracket as what this program did. So what happened? We all wrote this thing together and we put it out, and the response from people outside of the outdoor therapy world was amazing. We had US senators sign our open letter. We had human rights lawyers, people all over the world. It was an amazing response. Our community, virtually nothing. And what it showed me was we're more interested in protecting our work, our profession, than the people who come to see us. So the more we get expert-itis and think, I have to prove how smart I am, I have to prove I'm better than, I have to prove all these things. What happens is we forget as therapists that we have all the power. And that sometimes is a scary thought. People will say, I try to reduce the power. No, you have all the power, right? That person, this is a stranger walking into your office asking for help. So you have all the power. That is actually, I find that is like when I acknowledge that I have all the power, it means we could start taking risks and doing cool things together and acknowledging that. Where I think it's people who aren't thinking about the power who do things like we hear about Epstein, about all these politicians. They have all the power in the world. And when they get sick on their power, there's no off switch for them. So when you know you have the power, you know that you have the off switch. And so I do think it's really scary for parents who go, what diagnosis will my kid have? Will the therapist tell my kid that I'm a bad parent? Any of these things, it's really anxiety producing. So I think for therapists, it's not that more education or more rules is going to protect people from harm, because we have more rules than ever. Training takes longer than ever before. It's more expensive than ever before. So we have all of these things that are happening, and still we're hurting kids in the name of therapy. So I don't know what the exact answer is besides really helping therapists realize that we have all the power,
Mhm.
and when you know that, it's really awful that you would use that to hurt any child in any way. And that doesn't
Right.
mean you won't accidentally hurt people. That's part of therapy, you know? That's part of the risk you're taking of the relationship. But at least acknowledge it. I was just on a call this morning and I said, it's like, I encourage everyone to go listen to my friend Ben and Carrie's Very Bad Therapy podcast. First off, they're amazing. It's hilarious. They're not doing it anymore. But all you have to do is say, hey, general public, you have a bad therapy experience you want to share? And people come. And there's hilarious stories. Therapists taking their shoes off and they had smelly feet. Like, that person's not intentionally trying to do something wrong, but it's totally like ridiculous, right? And so, but there's also really harmful stories. And so it's part of the therapy world, but I think it can be reduced if we really teach people about power, that we see the most heinous acts are from the people with the most power. And I don't mean everything is an oppressor and oppressed victim world, but you can only hurt a kid in the name of therapy. And let's say even in a less egregious way, like a coercive, you have to come to this therapy until you get better. You can only do that to someone if you really think you're an expert. And
Mhm.
so you can only hold someone against their will if you really, really believe you're going to save their life. Now, for the most part, we're talking about kids that might be anxious, might be not sleeping. And I mean, there's kids that are really, really struggling. And it's just like we need to be cautious about the way we think about kids and forcing them all into therapy to fix them, to change them, to save them. This savior complex leads to something that is usually not that great. Look at like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Patch Adams. Once you institutionalize people, it's really hard to change your view of them. You will view them as the patient. You will view them as the sick person. And then it's really hard to change your view as to why they maybe don't need you, you know?
Mhm.
And the Rosenhan study, I think this is the 70s, they took journalists, got them admitted into mental hospitals, and then told them, once you're admitted, and the way they got admitted is they said they heard voices like yes, no, don't do that. You're an idiot. This is all voices we all hear about ourselves, right? It's called our conscience. And then they acted normal and said the voices were gone. Every person in that study was prescribed antipsychotics and could not leave until they started taking the antipsychotics. The journalists were told to take notes in that study. One nurse said this patient is exhibiting a writing behavior. So, writing is now pathologized because they're looking at you through the lens of mental health. What happened after that is Rosenhan came out and said, gotcha, we put a bunch of sane people into this mental hospital, and you treated them all like they were sick. And so the hospitals said, do it again. Our hospital's better. We won't get this wrong. And he said, yes, I will do it again over the next year. He didn't put anybody back. But the hospital started saying, this person is the sane person that you put. So even just changing the way you look at people changes the way you think of them as disordered. Or this is the kids these days affect just with mental health. The kids are lazy, they're fragile. Yeah, if you look for that, go for it. This generation also volunteers and cares about the planet more than any generation in history. They drink less, they smoke less. These are all things previous generations would go, no way the kids are drinking and smoking less when you have more access to alcohol than ever before. And I'm sitting there going, there still has to be something wrong with them. And if you're just looking for what's wrong with them, and this is going to sound really harsh, but what we hear, especially about the wilderness therapy programs, is if we don't send them away, they'll suicide and take their own life. And it's like, it's possible that anyone could do that. So when that happens once, that doesn't mean we do this to everybody. So therapists, we need to be putting on our adulting hats and our adulting lens and really recognizing sometimes that our savior complex is one reason that people can get hurt in our field.
Yes, for sure. And I think you have statistics in your book where over 40%, close to 50% of teens technically would qualify for some kind of a mental health disorder, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And you also have a thought about that kids are the canaries in the mine.
Hmm. Hmm.
Maybe you can touch on that. And I really enjoyed your chapter, how you guide us through the evolution of American teens from that industrial
Hmm.
factory workers. So I know we're
Hmm.
probably wrapping up the conversation, but I really want to hear that whole
Yeah.
story, how it all evolved.
Yeah, so that was interesting to me. Again, these are words that when you put the historical lens, like the word teenager was not really popularized until after World War II, right? So people weren't walking around being like those damn teenagers, right? In the early 1900s. So one of the things that happened is after the World War II, te- teenagers became cool, and worldwide, the Beatles wanted to come to America. Everyone wanted to be in America. And teenagers became something to market to. They wore hipper clothes. They were, everybody was prosperous. And I'm being generalizing here. And everything was amazing. Now, this scared the shit out of adults because, again, kids these days. So they thought, oh my gosh, there's going to be so much youth crime. This is terrible. And so all the efforts were into crime prevention and, you know, juvenile justice and a lot of these things. What's changed today is youth crime has mostly decreased. We see blips here and there where it goes up, but youth crime has mostly decreased. But now what we're seeing is internalizing issues, more anxiety, more depression, less of the externalizing anger outwards towards the world. Now, that could be an ebb of flow of things, but the interesting thing about the coal mine is this is something Nevin wrote, and it's been a talking point that has really resonated with me since finishing the book. No child creates the environment where they grow up in. They don't choose their parents. They don't choose the schooling system. They don't choose the country and politicians that are in power. They don't choose whether there's social media or not. It's what exists. It's right in front of them. The canary in the coal mine. So back when this actually only I forget, it was I think it was like the 80s where this practice stopped, like the 1980s. Miners, when they're going into a coal mine, they would bring a canary with them in a cage so that the canary would stop singing when it fell sick because it was more sensitive to the gas than the human. So that would be the indication to get the hell out of the mine, right? Then what they created, because miners actually got very close to their canary, they liked being around their bird, so they never wanted the canary to die. So what they did is they created a cage for the bird made out of glass with an open door, and when the bird fell sick and fell quiet, they could shut the door and turn on an oxygen tank, right? Now, think about what this metaphor is. That way, the sick bird can stay in the coal mine, right? So the idea is, how do we keep the bird in the coal mine? So the way we used this is when we talked to the expert about environmental toxins, he said this, like, if there was a lion biting kids every day, you wouldn't ask yourself who's genetically predisposed to being bitten by a lion, who's going to respond best to the cure of how you would take care of the lion. You'd move it, you'd get rid of it, and so, but with kids, almost every indicator regarding their mental health is recognized at school. So they either can't sit still, that's a disorder. They're anxious and don't want to go to school, that's a disorder. They eat too much or they eat too little, disorder, disorder. So everything is to keep you in school. And this is the part like where I'm saying this now, like a year removed from when we put our pens down with the book, you know? We could have gone way harder on this in the book. That the canary in the coal mine is if you can't sit still at school, we can sedate you so you can stay in the cage and be at school. You can stay in this one place where mental health and self-care, these should be about being radical and making changes and being amazing. Like, it shouldn't be about, do you fit into this system or not? Right? So you're only labeled as disordered by what you're not fitting into. Right? So this was the part to us that felt deeply troubling, that we started realizing it's okay, going back to corporations and the people in power, it's okay that the US still uses a chemical like atrazine for agricultural purposes, which is a total endocrine disruptor. It's been banned in the European Union for over a decade, but North America still has allowable limits. This is a clever way of saying allowable enough to poison you, right? So we hear this with like fluoride. Again, I don't lose sleep about these things, but this is an interesting perspective. They're allowed to do that to you, to our children, to everybody. And then when your child might be reacting to what they did, they can give you another chemical for that. So
Mhm.
take fluoride, for instance. It's in our toothpaste. It's in our drinking water. It's in if a truck of fluoride exploded in Washington D.C., the evacuation would be huge. It's a toxin. There's no doubt about this. Again, I don't lose sleep about these things, but what's in antidepressants, fluorine, like it's a story of looking at the kids and saying there must be something wrong with them, where the world that is being created all around them has these really like glaring obvious problems. Like, it's December 10th when we're interviewing, not to timestamp our interview, this is the day Australia has rolled out their huge fancy social media ban, right? Feels right. Is it right? Who knows? I don't know. But the amazing thing, in September of this year, an article came out that a mining company colluded with the EPA in New South Wales, Australia, and the state government to bury a story that 75% of Indigenous youth in this community had elevated levels of lead in their blood due to the mining practices in this community. So they're okay to do that to the most vulnerable children in that society. But the only thing the federal government can do is ban social media. Right? It's like, hey, this is actually a poison. It's actually harming our kids. It's like way less up for debate than social media. And still, everybody in charge with all the regulation and all the rules, even the EPA who's supposed to control for this, they go, yeah, let's bury this. We don't want this in the news. You know, lead is still allowed in the production of children's toys. Like all of these things, you just go, how is this possible? And so
Yeah.
that's where the book itself, like Paris Hilton called it a protest book. Like, it is a, like, hey, if we all sit around and wait for other people to sort this out, nobody's going to sort this out. And so, is it good that we have effort to keep kids off their phones? Sure. It's just in the scheme of things, I think it's like a nothing burger of a story. But I know that we were running out of time, but like, if a kid was in a mine and saying, I can't breathe, I don't feel right here, would we say take this pill and stay in the mine? Or would we go, let's look at the environment they're in and figure out a better way to engage them? And so that's where you talked about this before we hit record. That's why simple is often better than more complicated. That the more simple the intervention, which could be just like we're seeing this in some schools today, like that they're instead of detention, they're going on a walk outside. Now, I don't want any kid associating hiking with detention, right? Here we go again. I got to go outside again. But at the same time, it's a nice alternative and probably an opportunity for an adult and a child to connect with each other.
Yes, sure. I love it. And you provided so many good insights. I absolutely enjoyed this conversation, and it sounds like we
Thanks.
didn't even unpack half of the book.
Well, there's too many things to navigate,
Yeah.
what we, and what we wanted was the reader, like we really avoided, as you know, calling this a parenting book, because if you want 10 things to do tomorrow, go to the airport and buy whatever new bestseller is there. You know, we've survived the decade of the parenting manual, which comes with a new to-do list that's totally contradictory to the last to-do list. You have free range kids or the tiger mom.
Hmm.
Okay, choose whatever works for your family and figure it out. But we wanted a book for adults that you can feel the way I hope I come across. Like, this stuff fires me up that I'm like, there's work to do here for the sake of our kids. I don't want to feel like there's nothing that we can do. That sounds powerless and demoralizing. I want to feel like we need to make this change. And that means sometimes we're going to have to get in a fight. Like, this is what we learned from Sue Johnson when we spoke with her about therapy and emotions. And she was telling us, like, her father taught her when people say, put down that you're the wrong type of therapist for the day. Like, no, get in that fight for what you want to believe in. And so that's the deviance is if you're fighting for the right thing, you won't get burnt out, even though you won't see the difference, see the big changes. And, we're talking about the troubled teen industry, like nobody will ever like, my supervisor, he was a cult researcher, which is why power is all in my head. He brainwashed me, which he'd kill me for saying that. But, you know, you don't, I'll say this a different way. The kids of today, and I wish I put this in the book too. This is all the regrets of finishing a project. The kids of the day don't belong to you. They belong to tomorrow. So the second they're born, it's our work to set up tomorrow for them. And if we're sitting here just going, today sucks and the phones are crap and the kids can't handle anything and they're fragile, and we're not looking, again, that's where a lot of this feels so regressive. We're not looking for the progressive tomorrow, which is actually where the interesting stuff happens. And so I think there is so much in the book that is yeah, if you don't care about toxins, skip the chapter. But it's interesting stories about how we've known about the harm and no one can do anything about it. It doesn't make sense to me. And again, like I'm not like freaking out about fluoride or anything. It's just interesting stories.
Right, right. And I'm impressed with the level of experts that you interviewed. Sue
Mm,
Johnson is a well known expert. Then the
mm.
person on toxins, I believe he
Yep,
even
Bruce Lanphier.
he was critical in removing lead from the
Hmm.
paint, right?
Yep. Worked on the California Attorney General's office, worked for the EPA. And he's an interesting person that sort of similar. This is going to sound like big heading myself, and I don't mean it to. Like, sort of how the wilderness therapy community. Like, I don't get Christmas cards from them anymore because I've called them out. I've written research about things, and rightly so. Bruce gets disinvited from expert panels. He gets kicked off of things. He has to resign when people don't listen to him because he's going, "Why am I even here if our recommendations don't?" So it's inherently a frustrating journey. But at the same time, I think that's like gasoline in my tank. Like, it's like, you're really going to behave this way. let's go. Like, let's
Yeah.
get into the fight. Let's go after this. Like, I know, like, my mentor, Scott Miller, who I talked about, like, it's inherently frustrating that he's written the Bibles on psychotherapy and everyone knows his name and says, yeah, Scott, the relationship guy, common factors, isn't that amazing? But I need to know what manual to follow. Right. It's like, hey, guys, So it's an interesting world. And the thing I think, as someone who, works at a huge university and, like, as I said earlier, like, love my job, but also everything is a committee on this, a committee on that. And I'm sitting there going, can we just do our job, or do we have to talk about doing our job? And it inherently, like, slows the pace of change.
Mhm.
Where I saw, the second I could run my own nonprofit, we did whatever we wanted, whenever we wanted, you know?
Exactly.
And so when you have layers of systems and bureaucracy, it slows things down, sometimes for the right reason, like research ethics. Like, that's a pain in the ass, but researchers have done the wrong thing for centuries and hurt people, Like, unknown story about Pavlov, like, his study with dogs was so effective, they reenacted it with Russian orphans, like strapping babies to a chair, ringing bells, forcing their mouths open. Like, I'm glad we have ethics so we don't do that anymore. You know? So
Yeah.
there's pros and cons to all of it, but I think the book in general is about sort of how can we get past sensationalist headlines and really know what's going on and get back to basics with raising kids, that we've overcomplicated this. We've outsourced it to too many experts when you know your child better than I do, better than I ever will. Yeah. So I think there's too much information to navigate.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Will. It was such a pleasure, and I learned
No,
a lot
thank you.
today.
I hope we do it again.
Yes.